July 16, 1054. Cardinal Humbert, representative of the Catholic Church delegation, enters the Hagia Sophia and places a document in front of the Patriarch of Constantinople, Michael, who is preparing for the service. After which, he leaves Hagia Sophia and then Constantinople, returning to Rome. This document, left by Humbert for Patriarch Michael, declared the Patriarch's excommunication by the Bishop of Rome, that is, the Pope. That same day, the Patriarch calls a church council and excommunicates those who excommunicated him. Thus, July 16, 1054, went down in history as the date of the official separation of the Western and Eastern churches. What historians call the Great Schism, or the separation of the Eastern and Western churches, didn't happen overnight. The chain of events that led to the separation of the two churches actually has its roots centuries ago. Throughout the Middle Ages, one of the main topics of debate among Christian clergy was the question of which church possessed universal supremacy. The bishops of Rome, that is, the popes, claimed that supremacy belonged to the Western Church, because one of Jesus' apostles, Peter, came to Rome, founded the church here, and also suffered martyrdom here. According to the papacy's claim, Peter was the first bishop of Rome, and all those who followed him occupied the papal throne, representing him. Jesus himself pointed to Peter as the founder of the church. In addition, Paul, who made a great effort to spread Christianity like Peter, came to Rome and was executed here. According to the Western Church, the remains of both are buried under the church in the Vatican. That is, the Roman Church stands on the tombs of two of the greatest Christian martyrs. In the papacy's view, all of this demonstrated the universal supremacy of the Bishop of Rome. The Eastern Church, on the other hand, explained its supremacy with a more worldly approach. Constantinople was the capital of the empire and the residence of the emperor. In pre-Christian Rome, emperors were considered the head of religious authority. This tradition continued even after the transfer of the empire's capital to Constantinople in the 4th century AD. That is, emperors like Constantine, Theodosius, Justinian had authority in religious matters. Actually, for the Eastern Church, the matter was quite simple. In their view, the church located where the emperor was should be above all other churches. This dispute over supremacy, which continued throughout the Middle Ages, played a major role in the split between the Eastern and Western churches. It wasn't about which arguments were more reasonable. Both churches sought power over the other churches. It seems up to this point, the conflict had been more political than religious. But there was also a cultural aspect. By 1054, several key differences existed between the two churches, accumulated over the years. Some seemed insignificant, but over time, they contributed to the schism. For example, in the Eastern Church, the clergy traditionally wore beards. In the Western Church, there was no such tradition. In the Eastern Church, priests could marry, but not in the West. There were also differences in some rituals. The Western Church had a more dogmatic structure. The Pope's words were unquestionable. The Orthodox, on the other hand, considered the Patriarch a man who could make mistakes. On top of all this, the biggest problem between the two churches was language. The border that emerged after the division of the Roman Empire in 395 was not only political, but also cultural. In the West, Latin culture prevailed, and in the East, Greek. The official language of the Western Church was Latin. The Eastern Church used Greek. Even the emperors from the 5th century onwards stopped using Latin and adopted Greek, both spoken and written. Over time, language became a serious problem between the two churches. They couldn't keep up with each other's theological debates. For example, in the 5th century, a letter sent from Constantinople went unanswered for months because there was no one in Rome who could translate it. The same thing happened in Constantinople. Letters from Rome, written in Latin, were disregarded with disdain and considered unworthy of translation. By the 9th century, some clergymen in the Eastern Church, arguing that the Pope spoke the language of the barbarians, claimed he should never have authority over Constantinople. Another point of disagreement was the doctrine of the Trinity, that is, the teaching about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. In the early years of Christianity, emperors would call councils to reach an agreement on controversial religious questions. Councils were meetings of high-ranking clergymen to discuss religious matters. The first council of this kind was called by Emperor Constantine in the year 325 in Nicaea, that is, in Iznik. The doctrine of the Trinity was further defined at the Council of Constantinople in the year 381. According to this doctrine, the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father, that is, from God. However, the Western Church at the Council of Toledo in 589 changed this, declaring that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son, that is, from Jesus. They did this to emphasize the importance of Jesus. In this way, they wanted to protect Jesus from heretical views. At first, this didn't cause any problems between the two churches. Because of the language problem we mentioned earlier, the Eastern Church didn't hear about this decision for years, but when they did find out, their position was clear. To them, this was heresy. Historians call this issue the filioque. This Latin word means "and from the sun." In the early days of Christianity, there wasn't a clear hierarchy among the churches. Their interaction was mainly limited to exchanging information. However, decisions made at ecumenical councils elevated 5 churches above the others, giving them some authority over the churches in their regions. These were the churches of Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. The Eastern clergy called this system a pentarchy, meaning the rule of 5. In the early years of the pentarchy, the bishopric of Rome was considered the first among equals, but over time, the emperors, seeking to increase the importance of Constantinople and gain more religious power, started to woo the patriarchs of other regions. As they say, Rome wasn't built in a day. This inevitably deepened the division between East and West. At first, the popes had to submit to the political power of the emperors. To become pope, the support of the emperor was required. This situation remained for several centuries. In the year 726 AD, the Byzantine Emperor Leo III banned the worship of icons of Jesus and the saints. Pope Gregory III strongly opposed this act, known as iconoclasm, and wrote a letter excommunicating everyone who took part in it. However, this letter never reached Constantinople, as the messengers were arrested in Sicily, which at that time was under Byzantine rule. In 751, the Lombards, after conquering several cities in northern Italy, began to threaten Rome, which led to a new twist in the history of the Catholic Church. The Pope asked the Frankish king Pepin the Short for help. Pepin, being a pious man, willingly answered this call and, invading Italy with his army, defeated the Lombards. But Pepin's generosity didn't end there. He announced the transfer of the lands from Rome to Ravenna to the authority of the papacy. In this way, the Pope, in addition to being the highest spiritual authority in the West, also became the secular ruler of a state in central Italy. This was a crucial moment in the history of Christianity. This process continued in the year 800, when Pepin's son, Charlemagne, was crowned emperor by the Pope. At the same time, Empress Irene, a woman, sat on the Byzantine throne. It was generally believed that the emperor had to be a man. With Charlemagne's coronation, imperial power shifted to the West. Theoretically, supreme authority also passed to the West. And although in 802, Irene was overthrown and Nikephoros ascended to the throne, neither the papacy nor the Franks had any intention of giving up their claims to the imperial title. This, of course, led to a bigger divide. However, the straw that broke the camel's back was the Norman conquest of southern Italy. Before the Normans, a large part of southern Italy was under the control of the Byzantine Empire. Starting in the 11th century, these lands gradually came under the control of the Normans, who were Catholic. But there was a problem. The local churches continued to hold their services according to the Eastern Rite. In 1053, the Pope issued a decree that forced these churches to adopt the Latin Rite. Otherwise, they all had to be closed. This decision caused anger in the East, and in response, the Patriarch announced the closure of all Latin churches in Constantinople. The disagreements between the two churches quickly turned into a diplomatic crisis. To seek an agreement, the Pope sent a delegation to Constantinople, led by the French Cardinal Humbert, in June of 1054. The negotiations between Cardinal Humbert and Patriarch Michael did not go well from the start. Humbert gave Michael a letter recommending that he submit to the Pope's authority. In addition, Michael was very irritated by the cardinal's arrogant behavior during the negotiations. After this, Michael did not receive the Roman delegation for a long time. The cardinals remained in Constantinople for several more weeks. Finally, angered by this treatment, Humbert entered the Hagia Sophia Cathedral on the morning of July 16th and placed the bull of excommunication, sealed by the Pope, on the altar in front of the Patriarch. This was the last straw. With the support of the Emperor, Patriarch Michael first excommunicated Cardinal Humbert and then his entire delegation. With this decision, the churches of the East and West were permanently separated. At first, this situation didn't really affect the lives of everyday people. In areas where Western and Eastern Christians lived together, they kept getting along. However, over time, the tension between the churches caused problems between the people too. With the start of the Crusades, the differences between the people became much bigger. The breaking point was the year 1204, when the Crusaders captured Constantinople. This event is similar to the division in the Russian lands during the Tatar-Mongol yoke. Many attempts to make peace between the churches, similar to the Zemsky Sobors in Russia, were mostly unsuccessful. The division between the Eastern and Western churches, much like the split between the Old Believers and the Niconians, has not been fixed to this day, and it doesn't look like there's a solution to this problem coming anytime soon. And with that, we come to the end of our story today. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to read your questions and comments. See you in the next video.